topic isn't that interesting.
This is Steve Burley from Studio Burley, and I'm here with Janice Fiamengo again for our live stream, and we're talking about the Montreal Massacre that happened 30 years ago today, and not today, 30 years ago yesterday, December 6th, and that was yesterday was the 30th anniversary celebration. So Janice put out a Fiamengo file on this massacre, and she's here to talk to us about that particular event. Hi, Janice.
Yes. Hey, hi, Steve. How are you doing?
Pretty good, thanks.
That's good. You're looking tanned.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I do get an opportunity to get out in the sun here quite a lot in the Dominican Republic, as you might imagine.
Oh, Steve, don't rub it in.
It's horrible. I have to deal with 28 to 30 degree weather and sunshine virtually every day. And I forgot one thing. I have my patriarchal scotch, my patriarchal hat, and my emergency patriarchal cigar should the need arise.
Should the needs arise. There it is.
Okay. I screwed up the intro then, forgetting on the patriarchal accessories.
I've got my patriarchal ginger ale.
Ginger ale. I'm not sure where that fits in the patriarchy hierarchy.
I'll be swigging that back. I'm feeling a bit parched.
Yeah. So, Janice, that was quite a hard-hitting short, not a Fiamengo file. I introduced it as a Fiamengo file, but it was a No Joke Janice, which are shorter, punchier episodes. So that was a short and punchy one for sure.
Well, it was short. I think the distinction between the Fiamengo file and the No Joke Janices have kind of broken down over the last year, but that's okay. Yeah, it was short. There's so much more to say about this, but yeah, I wasn't sure how much to put in. There's a lot to say about how the event has been appropriated by ideologues in Canada and maybe even elsewhere. To make Marc Lepin's act become a stand-in for, supposedly the crisis in violence against women, often extended specifically to talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, which is somewhat ironic in the sense that Marc Lepin was not killing women that he knew intimately out of some sort of act of control, as the feminists like to say. He was lashing out against feminism itself. We don't really know, of course, what really propelled him. But certainly what he described in his suicide note, if we're really interested in trying to get at root causes of what caused at least this one man to snap and commit this horrific act of violence against innocent women, you'd think that somebody would look seriously at the suicide note, but as far as I know, nobody's ever done that at all. And they've simply taken his act and, turned it into a grand occasion for anti-male bashing and statements about violence against women, girls, and LGBTQ2 persons. And the need to make all sorts of drastic changes in Canadian society as a result, and with absolutely no genuine interest in Lepin's own psychology. In fact, with an interdiction against talking about him as a mentally ill individual, which obviously he was. So,
the common theme amongst all that, and hence the title of your No Joke Janice, they colonize, in other words, appropriate the entire event and use it in their particular agenda, which is, of course, to attack men.
Yeah.
Under the guise of protecting women, really.
Under the guise of protecting women and being concerned about, what various feminist experts like Elizabeth Sheehy, who's always one of the go-to feminists for this kind of discussion. She, of course, is a University of Ottawa law professor, I believe, who's written about women's killing of their, intimate partners and the reason that that should not be regarded as murder if it can be shown that they were abused. She uses the idea of the battered woman syndrome. She was interviewed for this 30th anniversary saying that, there's an epidemic of violence against women. And it's just really dismaying when you read through all of the government-sanctioned propaganda about this very singular event. I mean, the fact is, it had never happened before, and it has never happened again 30 years hence, and yet it's taken as representative of the daily abuse that women and girls experience in Canadian society, and never a word said about the far more prevalent violence experienced by men and boys in Canadian society. And the empathy gap. It really, you'd think that after years of thinking about this stuff and talking about it, one would cease to be surprised. But when you read it on every single government website in the country, and the omission of violence against men and boys, or any interest even in acknowledging that men and boys experience far greater levels of violence, it is just breathtaking. I've actually been sick over the last couple of days thinking about, heart sick, not physically sick, but like staying awake at night thinking about it. I'm not surprised, but I continue to be shocked and horrified by the extent of the denial and the lies.
In fact, one of he's in the Maclean's article, her first recommendation is to change the language. It's not domestic violence. She doesn't want that. She doesn't want violence against women. She wants to change the language to men's violence against women and girls. And she goes through a whole rationale in explaining that it's important to put the emphasis on men doing the violence. Yeah. And it's not just violent men or convicted men. She wants all men in that category. Men's violence against women. In other words, whether you've ever been violent or not, you're still part of this category of men's violence against women. Of
course, yeah. I mean, for one thing, since when has it not been called men's violence? Well, I've heard it more often called male violence against women and girls. It's been called that for decades. I don't know what she's talking about, as if we try to hide the fact that it's male violence. It's not true. It's been that way for decades. And secondly,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say she refers to the terminology gender-based violence as being not specific enough to men. And there is some use of gender-based violence in the media.
Yes, it's true. And everybody knows what it means.
Yeah, everybody does know.
It doesn't mean women's violence against men or women's violence against women. It means male violence against women. Everybody knows that. And everybody knows also that it is about all men somehow being complicit in this violence, because we're told over and over again at these vigils, at these Montreal massacre memorials, in government publications, that this is about a power differential between men and women, that men are killing women because they can, because that's how they exert control over women, because they feel entitled to do so, because they feel that they have some right to women's bodies and women's lives. I mean, we've been told that since day one. So not only is the event being appropriated for feminist ends, which happened, the day after the massacre, but the history of the event itself and its aftermath is being rewritten. We're being told now that we could never say before that it was an anti-feminist act. I mean, I remember the day. I remember all of the news coverage, all of the vigils, all of the church services, all of the news reports. That's what they said over and over again, that he had said
it was anti-feminist.
It was anti-feminist. He said he hated feminists, which immediately got equated to him having a profound hatred for women. No one ever made a separation between women, although indeed women were the innocent victims of his rage. But no one ever made a distinction between the fact that he didn't say he hated women. And in fact, as far as we know, he didn't hate women, but he hated feminist ideology. He felt that feminist ideology had ruined his life. And if we're really interested in getting to the core, I mean, well, okay, to a certain extent, I think he was mentally ill. I think anybody who commits an act like this is mentally ill. So there's, I think, always a problem with trying to figure out rational motives for why somebody who isn't rational does something horrific like this. But still, if we want to talk about what galvanized him, what may have pushed him over the edge, I don't see how we can't deal with the fact that he had very specific grievances, and he laid them out in his suicide note against feminist lies and misrepresentations of history.
Yeah, something we are very interested in.
Exactly.
And, yeah. And I might say, I had something I wanted to say, but I forgot it now. But there's another part I was going to say in one of the links that I'm going to put up on the screen right now. This article, this is a Parliament Hill release, and they actually say in here, and I'm pretty sure this is outright wrong, that women are at a 20% higher risk of violent victimization than men.
Yeah,
when all other risk factors are taken
Yeah,
into account.
I have circled that on in my list of papers too.
It's right in this article, and I'm going to try and find it in here. I'm pretty sure it's easy to find.
Yeah, oh, it's right there. It's right there. Yeah.
Right here, yes.
Yeah, there's first of all, there's a point that comes before that about the $200 million that the Canadian government, all sorts of government agencies are investing in preventing gender-based violence and promoting, support services and changing laws and, doing all sorts of things in.
Are you there? I think we just lost you there for a second.
Advantaged. Oh, can you hear me now?
No, I do. You just lost a couple of words there. But while we're at it, I think one of the things I wanted to make, and I think this is, I think you're in agreement with this, but I mean, he is mentally ill for sure. And I had a conversation with a fellow online today, one of our subscribers, and he was making the point that to stress the main mentally ill component of a man who does this. And my part of the conversation with him, which I slightly disagree with, I don't disagree that he's mentally ill, but I think the more important point is, why is he mentally ill? What are the factors that caused him to be mentally ill? And he's providing Lepine provided all the information himself. He said his hatred of feminism, which had ruined his life by eliminating opportunities for him to pursue goals. And if you remember, 1989 is 5 years after the introduction of affirmative action. Mm-hmm. And affirmative action really did remove opportunities for men who weren't at the top, okay? Mm-hmm. Top men throughout that period, you're talking about the best of the best men, they're always going to get in with the opportunities. But the men who are still really quite good, talented, but not at the top, they're shut out by cases by women who are not as talented as mm-hmm. those men, specifically because of the affirmative action laws. So these were the things that pushed him over the edge. I don't think they are the things that caused him to become mentally ill. He had a background of violence and abuse in his family from early age. Yeah. And another point that doesn't get told in this story is that his father left when he was 7 years old, and he was raised without a father. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be coming up as one of the most consistent features of male mass killers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The absence of a father. Yeah. And that too, we can't avoid the fact that feminism is in part, a significant part, responsible for the increase in fatherless families.
Yeah,
They
yeah, and
deserve
I
a
don't
vote.
know. I don't know if he made that particular connection, certainly, but there's a fascinating chapter in Paul Nathanson and Catherine Young's book, Legalizing Misandry, which I recommend to everybody. It's such a great book overall, but there's a whole chapter on Lapine there where they make the argument that in all sorts of ways, this was a young guy who was struggling with his masculine identity, in all sorts of ways. He'd seen his father abusing his mother. He himself had been physically abused by his father. Then his father wasn't in his life anymore. He seemed to have hated his father and changed his name, in part as a rejection of his father. He was himself struggling to form a masculine identity, attempted to join the military. When he was 22, he was rejected because they could see already he had mental problems. He had an antisocial personality disorder. So this was a guy who had all sorts of demons in his life. But then, the thing that he focused on in his suicide note was his anger at feminism. And this is the thing that, it can't even be addressed in our society anymore. And it enrages me. We've had now another 30 years of affirmative action since that horrible day. And the fact is that men are perfectly justified not in killing, obviously, especially killing innocent women who had nothing to do with these laws. But men are justified in feeling furious. And I'm surprised more aren't, that their life possibilities are significantly curtailed by laws that disadvantage them and advantage women, even at the same time as they're told that they're privileged in society. It makes me furious when I think about it, and it hasn't even affected me personally. If I were a man who felt that everything I had wanted to do in my life was being limited or placed out of bounds because of these pro-female policies, it would be a very maddening factor.
Yeah, and you're one of the few women who are able to empathize with the opposite sex. Most women, I think, are not terribly concerned.
It seems to me that even most men aren't very concerned about it. To me, this is something I think we should be marching in the street about it regularly. It is a naked injustice that's going on all the time in many, many spheres of society, where talented men, through no fault of their own, are being passed over, often for less talented women, although the legislation always says that they have to be equally qualified. But, we know that isn't the case. And nothing is done about it. And it's been going on, as you pointed out. It had been going on. It had affected Lapine. Now whole other generation of men has been affected by it. And it will continue to go on who knows how long. Attempts to have it curtailed are met with very vehement resistance in the United States, for example. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just while I was thinking about it, is that the other point he makes in his suicide note, he actually doesn't talk about affirmative action specifically. And, the big question for me, and I don't think we'll ever know this, was whether he was denied entry into Montreal's Polytechnic Institute precisely because of affirmative action. Somebody, I think, wrote that in the comments. He was denied, indeed, but we don't know, and we never could know whether they had an affirmative action policy in place right then. Probably he believed that he was, and he may well have been. The other thing he mentioned in his suicide note was that he was disgusted by the lies of feminist ideology about history. For example, that on Remembrance Day, November 11th in Canada, that women were being honored equally with men as having participated in the world wars. And his point was that women were never allowed. Yeah, women did participate to some extent. There were some small number of heroic women, but women were never drafted to fight on the front lines to defend their countries, and to pretend that women's participation was equal to that of men and that the sacrifice that women made was equal. He found it disgusting. And again, I don't blame him. And that still is going on, if even at an accelerated pace now, the lies about history that we're supposed to swallow in the name of equality and justice.
Yeah, and he has a right to be upset. And but and it goes without saying, of course, that the appropriate response to this is to go after the excesses and the crimes or sins of feminism, if you will, which we are doing. And it's taken, the world, our culture, 20 years to get around, 40 years to get around to exposing the stupidity, the lies, the outrageous claims of feminism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's a guy.
Not about justifying Lepine's actions, obviously. I mean, what he did was horrific, and that goes without saying. But I think that we should be able to say that his victims were also, to a certain extent, as we all are, victims of the lies and misrepresentations and outrageous, overt, legalized injustice against men that was going on then and is still going on now. And if we can't say that, if we just say that the answer, as feminists tell us, is more feminism, get more women into positions in engineering, which is still going on. It is. You can read articles about it all the time. If that's the answer, well, we're going to produce more justly angry young men, and some who are on the margins, who are totally disaffected and alienated and angry to begin with, are going to seize on that as an excuse for violence.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really going on too much about this, but it just really...
It is infuriating. I
can't believe it, actually, that so few people even seem to know or care.
Yeah. Definitely. And this ties in with the whole disposable male thing. I do want to point out, though, that you mentioned whether you didn't know whether affirmative action came in 1984, and it was rolled out very, very fast. I mean, I was working for Dow Chemical at the time, and they got in the research department, and I was only there 2 years, and they brought us all in. They had these meetings across the entire Dow Chemical world, which is, I think, maybe 100,000 people. The research department wasn't that big, obviously. But the vice president of research, which was a woman, at the time, and she was about, I'd say, 55 years old. So obviously she got up to vice president of Dow Chemical Research, That's extremely high level. Very, very few people get anywhere near that level of success. And she did as a woman without affirmative action. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other story. The need for affirmative action never was there, in my opinion. But anyways, we were all told in these meetings that they would be preferentially hiring women and promoting women for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, they did it immediately in 1984. Mm-hmm. In a group of chemists, for instance, and engineers, you're typically about 90% men, 90 to 95% men, and 5 to 10% women. But the hiring ratio was 50-50. Mm-hmm. And the promotions were way skewed towards the women.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we all came out of there, and I didn't think it would last. I came out of there and we talked. We said, well, this is one of their policies they're going to put in. 6 months later, they'll forget all about it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
nobody forgot.
Out my career there, all kinds of women, you wondered how they got promoted, or how they got hired. But
yeah. I mean, when I said that, I wasn't sure.
Sorry, not that all women were bad. I've worked with some very good technical women, but definitely affirmative action played a huge role in a lot of the hiring and promotions.
Yeah. I'm just not sure that, it actually affected him when he was applying to the Polytechnic School's engineering program. That's the only thing. And we'll never know that now, but it may well have been. And, and the other thing about this is that, like, the outright lies, we got off topic there a little bit, in the sense that you had brought up that statement about women and girls being 20% more likely to experience violence or more vulnerable. I forget exactly how it was worded. I've got that too here. This is a government document, and there it is. It says, it's under the quick facts section. It says women are at a 20% higher risk of violent victimization than men when all other risk factors are taken into account. My
Yes,
God,
I just put
I mean,
that up.
the lies.
I can't believe that. I don't know how they twisted up the statistics or how they cherry picked and pulled out things and twisted them around to come up with that, or if they just pulled it out of thin air. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, somebody did something, but we know that men, depending on which year, are between 76% and 78% of the victims of violence. So how could women possibly be at a 20% higher risk?
Yeah,
it boggles the
mind-boggling.
mind. It really is, and this is you can look at so many of these. These are government documents that tell these lies, or indeed tell half-truths. There's another one. This is the National Union of Public Employees that has a statement about gender-based violence and hate, in which it actually conflates the mass murder of women with anti-feminism. The two are, they're just on a continuum. If you're an anti-feminist, you're right there, right up there with mass murderers of women. And it says in 2018, a woman or girl was killed every 2.5 days on average, according to the University of Guelph. It's Canadian Femicide Observatory. That's another word that feminists are working very hard to bring into parlance, femicide, as if the killing of women is so qualitatively different and worse, of course, than the killing of men that we have to have a special term for it. Okay, well, yes, that's terrible. I agree. It's terrible that a woman or girl is killed every 2.5 days. How many men are killed in that time?
Well, we can guarantee it's probably 3 times as high as that.
Yeah. I mean, a man is killed at least every day. I mean, 9 men are killed per week compared to the 3 women that are killed, according to their statistics. And it's not even mentioned.
Invisibility of the male victims, invisibility. Just like in the being an Indigenous man didn't help in the inquiry. Right. 3 times as many Indigenous men are gone missing than women, and they are mentioned in these reports and these articles. The Indigenous women missing. Yes. As a result of this massacre, not a mention of the men. 3 times as many. I'm going to pop something up on the screen here, Janice, and get your comment on this too, because this is quite interesting to me, because it has other implications. Just read this little bit here. They're calling for, and some provinces have already instituted this, paid domestic violence leave in all jurisdictions.
Yeah, I saw that too.
You know what happens when you financially incentivize something?
Of course. Yeah.
False accusations. Woman wants 3 months off.
Yeah. It would be difficult to resist if you hate your job, you're desperately unhappy, and somebody comes along and says, look, you can get paid leave if you're a victim of domestic violence. Imagine the inflation of the claims. They're already.
Can you imagine a man trying to claim that?
No, of course not.
That's not going to be possible.
No, I mean, all this thing, the money that is poured into these programs that make it profitable for women to claim to be victims that's a whole other dimension of this tragedy, and it's just amazing. And at the same time, the overt indifference to male suffering. I just can't get over it. They talk in the intersectional feminist lingo, women, girls, LGBTQ, all that. I mean, that's completely irrelevant to Lepine's act, if that's what this is really about. He had nothing to say against lesbians or trans people or, anything. So why are they even mentioned? Well, because feminism is now intersectional feminism, and it has to show this awareness. But intersectional feminism is also supposed to be interested in race issues and other forms of marginalization which affect men. But all of that gets erased. It doesn't matter what other identity categories a man might fit into, except gay. Gay did get mentioned there. Every other form of marginalization and disempowerment that men experience is simply wiped out of the equation. I just find, sorry.
Go ahead. Even in this one report we've got up on the screen here, I'm going to put it up again. There's another section here that ties right into what you're saying. Releasing, this is the National Inquiry to Missing and Indigenous Murdered Women and Girls, which concluded this last June. Excuse me. Releasing over 200 recommendations to address violence and discrimination against Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. They've worked the lingo in there.
Yeah.
And I think they worked the lingo in there not because it was any way confusing before, but this opens it up to not just Indigenous women, but girls and gender diverse people. In my opinion, I think they're trying to constantly expand the net on these issues.
Yeah, well, certainly they're far more interested in making it possible for women to make these kinds of claims and to be included in whatever victim category they happen to be feeling sorry for. I mean, I personally found that the whole inquiry with the focus on Indigenous women and girls problematic for the same kinds of reasons that I find the exclusion of men from all these discussions so outrageous. Because if you're not a non-Indigenous, very poor woman or man, you know, whose life is full of violence, in what way is your life really so significantly different from that of an Indigenous person that you should be excluded from the inquiry? I really don't understand. If you're a young person who was beaten as a child, kicked out of your home at age 12, lived on the streets, got into prostitution because that seemed to be the only way you could make ends meet, lived with a series of abusive people, you know, never got an education, has no prospects. What difference does it make whether you're Indigenous or not Indigenous? I mean, I find the whole thing
clearly it doesn't make any difference. Well, you know, there are people in the very same category as Indigenous that are not Indigenous and experiences the same troubles.
Yeah,
I think in a way, you know, in Canada, being an Indigenous is a very identifiable group that has a long history of being treated separately.
Yes.
So it's easy to promote an effort to help an Indigenous group because it's a very identifiable in the public mind. But to say just those people affecting those problems, it's a bit diffuse, you know?
I mean, I find it a divisive, an unhelpfully divisive strategy, just as the exclusion of men from human concern is also entirely unhelpful.
I'd say I'm pessimistic. We've talked about this before. I don't think this can be combated effectively. I think I'm not intending to stop our productions and to keep raising awareness on what's really going on with feminism in our culture. But this has huge momentum still, and some people in our community think that, you know, tide is changing in that. I don't see it changing.
I don't know. I sure hope I'm wrong. You know, this week especially, like reading all this stuff, you know, reading the Prime Minister's statement, reading the website, the Status of Women Canada website, reading all those newspaper articles about this anti-feminist crime and how, and occasionally actually men's rights activists were mentioned as the, you know, most hideously violent and hateful and vicious people that you could imagine. They're trying to appropriate violence as saying it's a men's issue. How dare they? like it is the world turned upside down. And when you feel like you're one of the few people who can see that the world's upside down rather than right side up, it's a very bad feeling. And to feel like your own country is not really yours because its values are not yours. And in fact, it hates you for your values simply because you actually want every human being's suffering to be acknowledged.
Well, I don't even have that much of a problem with this, like an unequal treatment in the media. Where it comes to, I think, to the rubber comes to the road. No, I don't like it, obviously. I don't like it. But the media is the media. And I think the media should be private and they can report on whatever they want. And they should be called to task on lying and all the rest of that stuff. If they want to report more about women's suffering than men's, that's their business. I might not watch their channel. That's their risk they take if it's truly a free society. The problem is that we're creating these laws that put power into the hands of one group of people, in this case women, to accuse men and destroy their lives without any evidence. So it comes back to me, the biggest worrying issues are our attack on freedom of speech and our attack on presumption of innocence. And feminists are going full hog on both of those things. And that's where it gets really dangerous for men. And I'll give you an example here. And I talked to you about this one when I was in a coffee shop in Ottawa. Remember I told you where that crazy woman came in? And she sat down from me, right?
I thought you were going to say about the time that guy came up to us because we were talking about the Justice Kavanaugh case. So that was another one. We won't get into that. That was crazy too. But
it was a little crazy, but it was perfectly acceptable in the sense that he wasn't threatening in a sense. He wanted to challenge us on our conversation.
He had the right to tell us he didn't know what we were talking about, even though he was a complete stranger who overheard a couple of phrases of our conversation. But anyway,
it's not illegal. It's not criminal. I mean, he was offended by what we were saying. He came over, spoke his piece. We had little words, and when we were done with it, he went away. He went away when we said we wanted to have our dinner. I don't have a problem with that, really.
You were good. You were much better. I got so angry I could hardly speak. But anyway, no, the incident that you told me about, I think you emailed with me while it was still going on, or texted with me.
Yeah,
and that was awful. Tell people about that.
Well, I was just sitting there having a coffee. I had my computer, a laptop at the coffee shop. It was in a Starbucks in downtown Ottawa. And this woman came in. I didn't think anything about it. I was writing and I was staring off in the distance. I think I was working on the Birth of Feminism script. And every once in a while, I'd stop writing. I'd look off in the distance and I'd stare around the coffee shop, kind of in some ways in middle distance, in some ways people watching, And she came in, walked across in front of me, and I followed her there for about a second and a half as she walked in front of my table.
As one does tend to do. One looks at people occasionally in coffee shops.
I didn't think anything of it at this point. And then she comes in and she sits, there's an empty table here beside me, and then she sits at the next table. And it's a bench seat along a wall. Yeah. And so we're both facing the opposite window. So we're both looking parallel. So I have to turn my head 90 degrees to look at her, okay? And so when she first sat down, I watched her sit down. I literally, maybe it was 2 seconds or a second or 2 seconds, like you would when somebody comes to sit near you. And so I get back to my working and I look off in the distance. And then I have to admit, there was a couple of pretty girls on the other side of the coffee shop. I looked at them from time to time.
Horrors. Oh, no.
Oh, horror of horrors, right?
Oh, I've got to leave.
So anyways, I think I glanced over in her direction, either at somebody over there, or maybe I even looked at her once in the intervening 20 minutes. And then I hear at the side of I'm working at a distance, I hear her say, "Can I help you?" I look over like this. I say, "Excuse me?" She said, "Can I help you?" I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "You're staring at me." I said, I wasn't even looking in your direction. I have to stare at her. I'd have to go like this, right? With a 90 degree and hold my head like this. So anyways, she said, "Well, you're staring at me, and if you don't stop and smarten up, I'm going to call the police. And she got really angry, and she said other words too, aggressive words. I said, okay, this is crazy. I said, I just forget it. I picked up my coffee and my computer. I went and sat on the other side of the coffee shop. And in my head, I'm thinking, this woman, in reality, with the status of the laws in Canada and the attention to believe her and all the rest of it, if she had called the cops, I would be arrested. There's an automatic arrest thing that goes on, a policy in Canada. I would have been arrested. Maybe I would have been charged. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe I would have been released, but it would have disturbed my life probably for the minimum of 3 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Of tying me up in some kind of a legal system.
Or maybe longer. Yeah.
Maybe longer. If the charge was laid, it would be probably 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know?
And
that just on the word of a woman. And I did, when I was sitting there after that, I sat myself in a way where I couldn't possibly look at her. So I'm looking like basically away from her. And when I went to leave, she eyeballed me all the way out the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was looking for an excuse to cause an issue. But I think from her responses and stuff, she wasn't really all there. You know, she was an angry woman, or something was all messed up with her. But
she has the power to cause all sorts of source for you, all sorts of problems. And I've spoken to young men who have been expelled from university. One in particular who was told that his gaze was too intense, Gaze. His gaze was too intense. He had looked at 2 women in a university administrator's office too intently. They complained, and he was actually expelled. I think there had been some other incident as well, equally trivial. So yeah, this is what's going on. And this is a result, not directly, but indirectly, of decades of feminist propaganda about the damage that men do in all sorts of ways, but including by looking at women and objectifying them and, looking at them in a supposedly predatory way. Yeah, I just
want to respond to this guy's point here. Arrested for what? It would have been for harassing her. He would have tried to have me arrested for harassing her. But whether
they may well not have charged you, but they may well have talked to you and made your day miserable and completely at least derailed the day. And it's terrifying that a woman has the power to do that.
Yeah, I want to say that the fact that whether she could get me arrested or not, in a sense, is irrelevant. Because what feminists are succeeding to do here is to make you worry about it. This is similar to the panopticon idea, but in a sense, it's culture-wide, is that men everywhere know, or should know, or you're not paying attention, that a woman's word has the power to seriously damage your life. And whether she succeeds or not, she still has the right and the power to try quite hard. And
she will be taken seriously. Exactly. That's the thing. She will be taken seriously. The police are well aware that they have to take women's complaints about men very seriously. And, all the propaganda about gender-based violence and about women's fear, and how we need to create a world where women don't have to live in fear, it all feeds into this. And women's anger and their determination that even if you weren't really doing anything at that particular moment, you probably have done things in the past that made other women feel comfortable. Women really feel that calling the police on a man is striking a blow against the abusive patriarchy. And in that, they've been encouraged by feminist propaganda for decades. So it's
sorry.
Yeah,
it's frustrating, and it did affect me quite deeply. It worried me. It caused me to think about this, and I think I might write a little essay on this particular issue.
Yeah,
because there's no getting away from it, and I think it's going to get worse.
It is going to get worse. Yeah.
My point is why I encourage guys to leave. If any way you can, if you can leave Canada, leave the U.S. You're not wanted as a white male in specific, but men in general, but white men particularly, and very particularly old white men. The 3 most common insults, at least feminists see it as an insult, or derogatory terms for feminism is old white man.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly attacking things from old white men and implying that white men are not wanted in the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's horrible to live in a society where you feel that animosity coming at you because of physical characteristics that are completely beyond your control. It's it's terrible. It's a real shame. I think we should wind this up, Steve. I have a hungry man waiting for his dinner.
As we do wind this up, I'm just going to put up a little slideshow of the Dominican Republic, my last little trip on a motorcycle here. Janice, what do you have some wind-up words? I put these pictures up here to try and encourage guys to think that you can have a better life elsewhere. And it's certainly worth trying, even if you don't succeed, because don't stay where you're not wanted.
I think this is worth a whole other conversation. I think I'd like to talk about this, about your, the process that you went through in deciding on the Dominican Republic and the avenues of possibility for other men who don't want to make their livelihood and contribute to a society that overtly declares that it doesn't like them. I think, it's definitely worth talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Not now, but maybe next Friday, or next Saturday.
Well, folks, if you do want us to talk about that, mention it in the comments, and we'll have a live stream on that very topic. And maybe find some other fellows who have successfully set up a life somewhere else as well, for other examples. So once again, Janice, thanks for joining us with your words of wisdom, and thank you everybody out there. We've had a couple of donations today, a couple of very generous donations. Thank you very much to I can't get back far enough to see them. Sorry for not highlighting that.
And I would like to say I'm sorry that I talked too much. Both Steve and I, before we started, we said, okay, we got to engage more with people's comments, questions, not just us talking. But then this subject, it has really bothered me over the past week, and I got going too much. But next week we'll try to engage more.
Yeah, and me too. I'm going to try, if you folks can put the questions into the comments, I'm going to try more to keep an eye on those comments and address the specific issues. I tried a couple up there today. I hope you noticed a couple of comments that we commented on. So thanks once again for joining us, and this is turning into a weekly event, and there may be additional ones if there are special things we can, special topics that come up. So until next time, good night.
Good night.